loosely based on old maps that contain a number of coastal features strikingly similar to the Australian shoreline. The beautifully made French Dieppe maps are believed to be reproductions of Portuguese originals, and they show a landmass named Java la Grande between Indonesia and Antarctica. They were made by the Dieppe Cartography Department for wealthy and royal patrons, and included the Dauphin map of 1547, which was ordered by King Francis I of France as a gift to his son the Dauphin, who later became King Henry II. The map, which is now in the British Library, depicts a coastline that appears similar to the features of the Australian coast from Cape York to the current-day southern Victoria. Other surviving charts from this period include a book of maps dated 1542 that was presented to England's King Henry VIII by Frenchman Jean Roets, an artist cartographer who was a member of the Dieppe school. The Jean Roets maps depict a coastline similar to some of Australia's north and east coasts. Then, in 1566, Nicolas de Leon created a world map whose depiction of Australia had similar features to one of the far northeast coast of the continent made 200 years later by Captain James Cook. Also supporting the theory of an earlier Portuguese discovery of Australia was the claim in 1836 by two whalers that they had found the remains of a 16th century Portuguese ship on a deserted stretch of beach on the southern Australian coast near Warrnambool. There were other reported sightings over the next few decades, but no more evidence has been found since the 1880s, despite the offer of a $250,000 reward by the Victorian state government in the late 1970s. Historians are divided as to whether the maps are proof that the Portuguese had, albeit unwittingly and presumably unknowingly, discovered Australia in the early 16th century. Some argue the coastal features on the maps are too accurate for their likeness to the Australian coast to be a coincidence. The explorer Matthew Flinders was among those who thought the Portuguese had been to the Great Southland many years before him. He said of the surviving maps that the direction given to some parts of the coast approaches too near the truth for the whole to have been marked by conjecture alone. Others, however, argue the maps are merely theoretical constructs and not the result of actual discovery. They point out that the theory of earlier Portuguese discoveries rests almost entirely on the Dieppe maps. There are no surviving Portuguese charts from the 16th century that show any traces of a large landmass, and there are no records of any European sailing along the coast of Australia before 1606. It has also been argued that the features of Java la Grande on the Dieppe maps could resemble the coast of Indonesia and Indochina as much as they do Australia. It is known that, by the end of the 18th century, men from Malaya had a well-established trade fishing for turtles and trepang, or sea cucumbers, on the north and west coasts of Australia. The men arrived in October and November in fleets of small wooden boats that fanned out across the top end to fish throughout the summer. Each boat weighed about 20 tons and had a crew of about 20 men who lived on deck in bamboo cabins. The trepang were taken ashore and boiled, sun-dried, and then smoked, before being sold in China, where they were regarded as a great delicacy. In 1803, Flinders met some of these seamen and speculated they had fished large parts of the coast for many years, as he had seen traces of them so abundantly along the coast of the Gulf. The French explorer, Nicolas Baudin, also recorded seeing the fishermen on a different part of the north coast of Australia on his expedition in the same year. It has been claimed that the Chinese reached the east coast of Australia as early as the time of the Han Dynasty, 202 BC to 220 AD, and perhaps even further back in the undocumented past. In recent decades, a number of books have argued that ancient maps suggest Chinese navigators charted parts of the east coast of Australia up to a century before the Portuguese. However, the first documented European visits to Australia were by the Dutchman Willem Janszoon